Cleopatra is one of the most powerful and famous women in history. During her reign, prosperity and stability increased in Egypt, and the good relations established with Rome contributed to the revival of Mediterranean trade. Despite all these positive developments, when she looked at Alexandria, where she was born and raised in her final days, she had to witness the Roman soldiers ravaging the city and the people fleeing in screams. Upon her death, the Ptolemaic dynasty to which she belonged came to an end, and the Roman era began in Egypt. During Cleopatra's rule, Egypt was part of the Macedonian Empire. In the division of the empire, Egypt was shared among the generals after the death of Alexander. During Cleopatra's governance, the power dynamics in the region began to change with the rise of Rome. By the year 51 BCE, there were 12 Ptolemies on the throne of Egypt. The dynasty had ruled Egypt and been the sole ruler of the region for 300 years. However, with the expansion of Rome, all Mediterranean territories outside Egypt were seized. This situation indicated that Egypt was the target of Rome. In the year 51 BCE, after Cleopatra's death, two heirs were left. One was her 11-year-old son, the 13th Ptolemy, and the other was her 17-year-old daughter, Cleopatra. The 12th Ptolemy had bequeathed that his daughter and son should marry and rule Egypt together. However, this practice was not well received in Egyptian society. Cleopatra mingled with the Egyptian people, winning their support. Clever and talented, she learned the Egyptian language and made the people embrace her. However, these qualities led to her not being accepted by the nobles and being unguided. Pothinus, the chief advisor of the 12th Ptolemy, sought to dethrone Cleopatra and make her younger brother, the 13th Ptolemy, the sole pharaoh. However, Cleopatra, with the support of the people, formed an army and appeared in front of the gates of Pelusium in northeastern Egypt in 48 BCE. Cleopatra's goal was to overthrow her brother and seize the throne to become the sole ruler of Egypt. However, Egypt, dragged into civil war, faced the struggle. At the same time, in the Roman Republic, there was a civil war between Julius Caesar and Pompey. Pompey, fleeing to Egypt, sought the support of Cleopatra. With Pompey's arrival in Egypt, the internal war between Ptolemy and Cleopatra was postponed, and they returned to Alexandria. Hoping to fight again with the help of Caesar, who had sought refuge in Egypt, Pompey lost the civil war in the Battle of Pharsalus, putting him in a weakened position. The suggestion of presenting Pompey's severed head to Caesar was put forward by Cleopatra's mentor, Pothinus. This was intended to gain Caesar's gratitude. Pompey was captured and prepared, with his head mummified, as a gift to be presented to Caesar. However, there was something Pothinus and Ptolemy did not consider. Caesar immediately came to Alexandria after the events. He was angered when he saw the mummified head of Pompey. Despite being his rival, Pompey had been a former ally. Caesar's daughter Julia had been married to Pompey. Caesar did not approve of the disrespectful killing of Pompey. Therefore, he rejected Cleopatra's request for help and did not want to get involved in the civil war. However, the internal conflict in Egypt needed to come to an end as soon as possible. Egypt had a significant unpaid debt to Rome, and the Roman economy, damaged by the war, required this money. Caesar requested Ptolemy and Cleopatra to disband their armies, reconcile, and co-rule their country. However, under the influence of his advisor Pothinus, Ptolemy XIII rejected this proposal. Despite Caesar's demand for the disbandment of the Egyptian army, the army under the command of Ptolemy XIII was brought to Alexandria. This posed a challenge to Caesar. Although Caesar sent messengers and exchanged letters with Cleopatra, he preferred to meet her in person, thinking that she lacked an impressive advisor. Cleopatra secretly came to Alexandria to meet Caesar. The young woman's attractiveness stemmed not only from her beauty but also from her intelligence. Cleopatra spoke many languages fluently, was a good orator, and had an impressive personality. During the meeting, Cleopatra's charm and intelligence greatly impressed Caesar. Caesar attempted to reconcile the two rulers and declared them joint rulers. However, this situation made Pothinus quite uneasy. Pothinus believed that Caesar's influence on the Egyptian throne would harm the country's interests. Additionally, he knew that if Cleopatra seized power, his influence would diminish, which was not in his favor. Therefore, Pothinus made efforts to portray Caesar as an enemy to the people of Alexandria and planned to initiate a resistance. He even went as far as melting the gold in the royal treasury publicly to show that Caesar would not benefit from Egypt's wealth. Caesar sent envoys to end the internal conflict in Egypt and reconcile the two siblings, but the envoys were killed under the command of Achilles. This indicated that the Egyptians were not inclined to compromise. Caesar quickly moved to rescue Pompey, but he could only bring a limited number of soldiers with him. Therefore, he preferred to avoid open-field battle and hoped to balance the numerical disadvantage by placing his soldiers in the narrow streets of Egypt. Caesar struggled to win the internal war in Egypt against the Egyptian army. During this process, he clashed with the Egyptian army for months, but with the help of reinforcements from his allies, he eventually emerged victorious. Ptolemy, along with the reinforcement forces, abandoned Alexandria and advanced to the Nile Delta. Caesar followed him, encountering the Egyptian army. In this conflict, Ptolemy's younger brother drowned in the Nile River. After their victory, Caesar and Cleopatra enjoyed a stroll along the Nile together. During this period, it was clear that Caesar was attracted to Cleopatra. Cleopatra, on the other hand, had already made plans to impress Caesar. Cleopatra thought that impressing Caesar would be in her own interest, and this strategy worked. Caesar put Cleopatra and her brother on the throne of Egypt and returned to Rome. However, after Caesar left Egypt, Cleopatra paid a visit to Rome. Cleopatra started to stay in Caesar's villa in Rome. Although it is difficult to know how much Cleopatra was influenced by Caesar, it was clear that Caesar was influenced by her. When Cleopatra returned to Rome, Caesar was assassinated in 44 BC. But Cleopatra's affair with Antony caused a great scandal in Rome. Cleopatra continued to influence and support Antony by writing letters to him. Antony, on the other hand, was attracted to Cleopatra even though he was married to Octavia in Rome. The Egyptian queen managed to keep Antony's interest alive by sending him gifts and luxurious presents. In 36 BC, Antony and Cleopatra suffered a major defeat after their unsuccessful campaign against Rome's western territories. This gave Octavianus a great advantage in Rome. Octavian took this opportunity to accuse Antony of betraying the people and declaring him an enemy of Rome. Following these accusations, a public trial was held in Rome. During this trial, nothing could be done in Antony's favor, and he and Cleopatra were declared enemies of Rome. Cleopatra joined with Antony to form a united force against Octavian, the heir of Julius Caesar, but Octavian's preparations for war had already begun. In 31 BC, the battle known as the Battle of the Sea took place. In this battle, Octavian's fleet defeated the fleet of Antony and Cleopatra. After this defeat, Antony committed suicide. Cleopatra decided to join Antony and ended her life by poisoning herself in a room full of lions. Cleopatra's death marked the end of the Ptolemaic kingdom of Egypt, which became a province under the Roman Empire. In 32 BC, the situation in Rome was steadily deteriorating. Octavian declared Antony and Cleopatra to be enemies of Rome and incited the Roman people against them. Antony and Cleopatra decided to flee Rome and return to Egypt. In the process, Antony ended his marriage to Octavian's sister Octavia. In 31 BC, the Great Sea Battle took place. In this battle, Octavian's navy defeated Antony and Cleopatra's navy. As a result of the battle, Antony and Cleopatra were forced to flee. Cleopatra followed Antony's retreat and took refuge in Egypt. After losing the victory, Antony decided to commit suicide. According to legend, Antony believed that Cleopatra was dead and ended himself with a sword. In reality, however, Cleopatra was still alive. Upon hearing the news of Antony's death, Cleopatra decided to prepare her own end. In 30 BC, when Octavian's armies approached Egypt, Cleopatra surrendered to Octavian. Cleopatra was paraded by Octavian as a prisoner in front of her people. Control of Egypt was completely in the hands of the Roman Empire. Cleopatra ended her life a few days later by giving herself poison. Cleopatra's death marked the end of the Ptolemaic dynasty, and Egypt became a province of the Roman Empire. This tragic story symbolizes one of the most important periods in Roman history, the end of the Roman Republic and the birth of the Roman Empire. Cleopatra and Antony's relationship and its end have inspired many artworks, books, and movies throughout history. The will shocked the Romans. It was impossible for the Senate to recognize these donations to Cleopatra. Indeed, it did. However, Octavian did not want to be seen as starting a civil war, so he presented it as a matter of teeth and declared war against Cleopatra, not Antony. The Egyptian army led by Cleopatra and Antony faced Octavian's army in September 31st BC. Octavian laid siege to Antony's fleet, which had gathered in the port city of Actium. Octavian won the Battle of Actium, one of the most important naval battles in history, and Cleopatra and Marcus Antony were forced to flee to Egypt with the ships containing their treasures. Octavian followed them and reached Alexandria. After a few months of resistance, Alexandria and the city, which had fallen to Octavian, were destroyed and burned. Cleopatra took desperate refuge in a mausoleum. When Antony could not find where Cleopatra was, he thought she was dead and in his grief tried to kill himself by stabbing himself in the stomach with his sword. But the wound was not fatal enough to kill him instantly. After a while, he received news that Cleopatra was not actually dead. Some Egyptians took him to the mausoleum where Cleopatra lay. Antony would die here in Cleopatra's arms. After his death, Cleopatra would kill herself with poison to avoid the humiliation of the Romans. She was a queen and she had to die a queen's death. She had already lost her throne once when her brother had exiled her. Now she would rather die a queen than lose her throne again and be humiliated. Cleopatra, who came to power at one of the weakest periods of her dynasty, was able to influence two great Romans thanks to her intelligence and to take advantage of their power. This allowed her to retain her throne, but she was not content with that. She longed to return her country to its former glory, and she came very close to this, especially with the lands she gained under the name of Alexandrian endowments. From the beginning of his rule, he was like an acrobat walking on a tightrope. She had successfully walked this tightrope for a long time to secure her country and herself. However, her marriage to Antony and her attempt to annex Roman lands to Egypt by persuading him had been the most obvious move that had shifted her foot. After Cleopatra passed away as the last pharaoh of Egypt, the lands of Egypt fell into Roman hands, and no other pharaoh succeeded her. The last lines of ancient Egyptian history were officially closed with Cleopatra's death.